All right, we're back. We are COMP305 in the fall of 2017 semester, and it's week 6, part 1 of our broadcast, and it's we're talking about 2D animation a little bit today and sprite sheets with Unity. Okay, so how are we going to do sprite sheets? That's going to help us out. So just to recap what we did last week, we kind of got our Mail Pilot game working, right? And we also put it up on GitHub pages, which is kind of cool. Hopefully you guys have explored that, because next week on Saturday is your first runnable. That's when it's due. I'm assuming that there's not going to be any interruption in our services, right, between now and then. However, if we somehow can't get together next Saturday, and it's possible we may not, then I expect that you guys put together your first runnable, right, regardless of whether I'm here or not. Okay? And I'll talk about that a little bit later. One other thing that's happened over the last little while is that Unity has updated to 2017.2. I highly recommend, maybe not today, but another day, that you download 2017.2 because it's the next version. And it actually has some really cool tools for 2D that are built in. Which are really, really cool. For example, it has, for people who are interested in doing platformers and even some strategy games, they have tiling and tiled, like a grid and all that kind of stuff, a tile map. It's built into Unity, which makes it a lot easier, right, to organize your tiles and everything else. And a bunch of other things. And in fact, if we were going to look at all the things that happen, if I say Unity roadmap, the Unity roadmap, here's how it looks. So 2017.2, it has 2D tile maps. This is what it added. Let's see what else we can talk about that are really related. So mostly that, it looks like. Google VR, some other stuff. Looks like more particle stuff for us, which is really, really good that they included more things. Another platform, they included Vuforia, another VR kind of thing. Another platform, mixed reality with Windows, which is kind of cool. So they're adding more support, different kinds of shader support, and all those kind of things. So that's really the roadmap for 2017.2. And if I look at tile maps, what that is, it says new tile map collider 2D produces colliders per tile for the 2D tile map, which is really awesome. That's like something we've been waiting for a very long time. So really good 2D stuff that's been included. The next release looks like, again, it looks like December 2017 when that's coming out. They have a bunch of other things. So everything from more particle shaders, and they're going to continue to add stuff here. And so on. And you can actually go up online and say, you know, I want certain things. Like, for example, someone's been requesting things like 2D sprite shapes and so on, right? It also talks about things that they're in development, 2D physics, low-level API for 2D physics, 2D character animation, and so on. One other thing to talk about is that if for those people who are interested in doing animation with 2D, we're going to talk about a little bit about that today, but there is a package you can download on the Unity Asset Store. And one of the things we haven't really talked about too much is the Unity Asset Store. So if I say Unity Asset Store, and if I go in there, right, Unity Asset Store is one of the best things about Unity, because it has, everybody's kind of contributed to it. A bunch of people who are professionals who make assets that you can download for cost. For example, if you want to buy some of the stuff that's listed here, and this is just as of this recording in October of 2017, but you can see that there's going to be a lot of other stuff. You can also look for things for free, but one of the things that's free that's been supported by Unity Technologies is something called Anima 2D, right? So it's called Anima 2D if you guys go there, right? And what it does is it provides IK and bones, 2D bones, for things, for if you want to make things like more realistic in terms of walk cycles and all that kind of stuff for your 2D characters. So that's really cool. We never had that before in Unity, and it's a plugin. That's what it is, like a download, and then you're good to go. So if you're someone who wants to make a platformer, or if you're someone who is going to make some kind of game where you need character animations, there's some really, really good support for Anima 2D, especially when it comes to organic shapes. Like things like, in this example, is there's a robot, you can make him walk around, flip around, and all that kind of stuff, and it looks pretty realistic. And even if you're not an animator, you're not an artist, you can be a technical artist, right? And that's part of it, right? Where you can actually use some of the tools that Unity supplies, to really do some good stuff. So highly recommend taking a look at this. I know that Wallace has been using it in his classes when it comes to explaining how to do IK, inverse kinematics with 2D shapes, right? So I think that's kind of good to look at, and it's free, and it's been built by Unity Technologies, the same people that build Unity. So so a couple of really cool things with Unity coming out, I think is worthwhile looking at. We're also going to talk about, let me bring that back. We're also going to be talking about Sprite Sheets today for a bit. And I think a great thing to look at, because we want to, we have to think about Sprite Sheets as textures, right? And there's a great asset that you can download, not from Unity. Maybe I've mentioned it before. It's called Texture Packer. Texture Packer is a professional program. It's not free. But what it allows you to do is combine your sprites into one sprite sheet quite easily. And what it also does is provides an atlas, sprite atlas, which is basically a map, if you will, of where all your sprites exist on the sprite sheet, right? So, and it plugs in nicely into lots of 2D packages, including Unity and Unreal, if you're interested in doing those kind of things. So why do we use Sprite Sheets, and what are they? Well, imagine if I have to load in a bunch of assets into my package, it's much easier to pack it into one Sprite Sheet, so we're only dealing with one texture as opposed to many, right? So instead of doing many kind of calls to the file system, we're only going to do it once from a loading perspective, and it packs our game a little tighter than if we had multiple textures. Okay, that's what it does. So it's kind of a convenient thing. We can also use Sprite Sheets for things like animation, frame-based animation. And let me just pull up frame-based animation for you to kind of talk about what that is. So frame-based animation, right? If I was to look at frame-based animation, and let's take a look at some examples. Let's look at some images here. Here's an example of a sprite sheet. There's Mega Man, right? And you can see that, or maybe it looks like Mega Man, but you can see that there's different poses here. I'm just pulling a random sheet here. Let's see if there's another one that's maybe better. That's definitely Mega Man. But you can see that what's happening is, there's different poses here, right? And almost like if you frame-based animation to me is like, if you have a flip book and you draw a diagram, like a character on one page, and then you flip to the next page, draw another little pose, and slightly different than the last page, and you keep doing that, and you flip the book, and it looks like it's moving. And the reason why it looks like it's moving for us is because of human persistence of vision. So if I was to type in that, human persistence of vision, persistence vision, there we go. There we go, yeah. Then what it is we can only see, and some really cool articles around it. Let's go to Wikipedia for a second. This is probably pretty good. The ability for us to detect changes in motion, right? That's what it really is, right? They have a little article here. Nothing really great, but the idea is that at one point, animation was done with wheels, right? They would cut basically slits inside of a wheel, and they would make the wheel kind of go flat. So they put a wheel on a table, and they cut little slots in the wheel, and in the middle of the wheel there would be some images, and you would turn the wheel, right? And the slots would kind of give you a glimpse of different images inside the wheel. A woodcut basically is what it is. And so what you'd end up getting is, you know, some images that looks like animation. And I wish I had a little video for you to show you, but that's how it looks. And they got this idea that you could kind of create almost like a, this is not really great to look at right here, especially when you're recording. But some kind of, the idea of motion where you move from one pose to the next, and it gives us the illusion of, it gives us the illusion of motion. That's what it really is, right? So notice here they have two things. This is ones. That's what they call it ones and twos. So ones mean that every frame, you know, the pose changes every frame, right? That's what's happening here, right? So that's on ones. And then twos means that every other frame, the pose changes, right? And then there's something called an in-between, right? So in between frames, you know, as an example, back in the day, and I'm not an animator, but I have a friend who's an animator, and he would talk to me about, he would do something called keyframes, right? So keyframes would work like this. I would have one frame in at one point in time, and then I would have another frame at another point in time of a pose, right? And then what would happen is somebody, right, would go in and draw the intervening frames, the intervening cells of the movie, let's say, that he was making. So for example, if I had a pose like, let's look on the screen here, like this one, and let's say I didn't have this one, okay, but I had this one. So let's say 4 frames later, I had this one. Someone would draw in the other 3 frames. That would be an in-betweener. That would be a job someone do, right? Nowadays with computers, we use interpolation to go from this frame to this frame. And let me just give you an example of that. So if I was going to go into Blender, and guys, you know, we really should know some kind of asset creation tool. Call it Blender, Maya, 3D Studio Max or something. You should know it a little bit. Even if you're not going to be a 3D artist, it doesn't matter. You should know a little bit about it if you're going to get into games. I'm going to just do a couple things with Blender today to showcase what it's like to do a little bit of an animation. Okay, so I'm just going to do one of these. So in Blender, Blender is a 3D creation program, as well as it can be used for animation, for texture painting, for all kinds of stuff. It is open source. You can download it for free at Blender.org, if I'm not wrong. Let me go to Blender for those people who have it. Blender.org, yeah. And the latest release is 2.79. Some people have said that, you know, at the beginning, Blender was quite basic, I would say. You know, back in the day when Blender first came out, you know, didn't have a lot of features. The feature sets were limited. But over the years, Blender has really come to its own, and some small indie studios started using it, and then finally some of the bigger places are starting to use it as well because it's free, right? It's royalty free. You can use anything you make from Blender. You can use in your games, right? And it's a great resource. So you can download for free, and it's cross-platform. It'll work on Windows, Mac, I think in Linux too. And I'm just using here, I'm kind of looking at the cube, and Blender comes with a cube for in the beginning. All it comes with is this. You can see I'm just tumbling here around the object. And it has the same gizmo that we can see in Unity, except in Blender, as an example, that we see that Z is up as opposed to, normally in Unity it's Y is up. So usually we see this in Unity, right? Some kind of a thing like this, right? But in Blender, not so. It's like this. The other thing about Blender, really quickly, and I'm not going to do a Blender tutorial today, but when we select objects in Blender, we use the right mouse button instead of the left mouse button, which is kind of different as well. So there's lots of stuff to do, but you can still move objects in Blender just the same way that you would be used to moving things around in Unity. You can scale objects in Blender up and down, right? As an example, you can rotate objects in Blender do all kinds of stuff like that you would normally do. And then once you're done, you can bring that blend file right into Unity by dragging and dropping. It's like that simple. Oh my God, I almost like gave you guys the Apple, motto. It's that simple. They just keep saying that. If you actually watched Tim Cook lately and his whole team, they always say that it's that simple, right? Well, it's kind of the same thing here. Blender is pretty simple to learn when it comes to once you've overcome the interface challenges. And what I mean by that is because Blender has such a weird way of interacting, and you need to know the hotkeys. But once you get by all that, then it's quite a useful tool, and I would say in many ways it has just the same features as Maya and other professional programs like 3D Studio Max. It can do the same things. It just takes more steps sometimes. Sometimes you can do things easier in Blender than you can do with 3D Studio Max and Maya, and sometimes the other tools are easier to use, right? As students, you have access to 3D Studio Max and Maya as well. I'm just going to go to that for a second. So if you look at the Autodesk website, if I go Autodesk Student, that's perfect. Autodesk Student, you can see what the student downloads allow you. It's pretty cool. So these are educational licensed products from Autodesk, right? Tons of stuff. And you can see that AutoCAD is one of them. Maya, Mudbox, a bunch of different things. As long as you're a student, you can use these things. And there's tons and tons of them, like of options. Maya, I would say, is one of the best ones. Between Maya and 3D Studio Max, those are the two, I would say. You can see that I can kind of, maybe I can't right now because of my protection levels. But one of the things you can see is that it supports different operating systems and languages. I just can't access it right now because of my protection levels on my browser. Well, Maya, great thing about that is that it's used by studios like, some larger game studios. 3D Studio Max definitely used by places like Ubisoft and those things. So really good. But Blender can do a lot of the stuff that Maya and 3D Studio Max can do. So here we are back in Blender. I just want to give you that was just a brief introduction on what they do. And on the bottom, as you can see, and again, you don't have to do anything here. I just want you to watch. On the bottom, I have a timeline. We're talking about animation today. I'm looking at this cube right now in a perspective view, and I'm going to shift from perspective view into an orthographic view where the cube looks flat. Okay, so I want to move the cube from here, and I want to move it over there, right? And what I can do is I can create something called a keyframe. So I can create a keyframe here, and then I can create a keyframe here, and the computer will interpolate my movement from one place in this space to another, right? So the cube is actually three-dimensional, right? But I'm only going to look at it in terms of orthographic view. So I'm just going to move the cube way over here so you can see it, right? There's also a camera you can see on the top. We don't care about that right now. I'm going to insert my keyframe. I'm going to insert my keyframe when I can insert a keyframe to capture location, rotation, and scale. Okay, so think about it this way. Every time I keyframe, I can almost capture the location, any kind of rotational translations or scale that I want for each time I move my objects. Okay, so in this case, I want to do all three. Here's my cube. So that's the first keyframe. And if you notice, it's on keyframe 1 on the bottom, right? My total timeline right now is 250 frames. This is the bottom here, 250 frames, okay? And I want to change this from 250 frames, let's say, to something like 60 frames. So I only want to look at 60 frames. I can zoom in here to see more of the frames, right? So again, I want to move in. You can see a lot more frames. So there's 60 frames. Each of them have their own little area, right? And I can really zoom in quickly, but you can see these are the 60 frames, and I'm on frame 1. Great. I want to move now the cube from frame 1, right? I want to click on the next frame. So let's say 5 frames later, so or 4 frames later at frame 5, right? I'm moving my cube here. You know what? And this is the first one, so I'm going to just put another keyframe, right? So location, rotation, and scale. I've kind of captured those locations too. And let's go to frame 10, right? And I'll move that somewhere else. And what I'll do this time is I'll rotate it, right? I'll rotate it so that it does this, right? And then I'll capture rotation, location, rotation, and scale. right? I go to the next frame, frame 15, right? And not only will I move it here, but I'll also move it up, right? And I'll, just to make sure that you can see this, I'll make it so it's a little bigger. So I'll kind of increase the size of my key, right? And I'll capture that, location, rotation, and scale. And you know what? Just to complete this whole thing, right, I will go to the next keyframe, my next frame that I want to look at, frame 20, move it across, move it back down, as again, back on the timeline, back on this little red line, which is the x-axis, right? Scale it back maybe a little bit smaller, much smaller, right? And rotate it back a little bit so it looks like it's almost even. I'm not using any, I'm just using my eye for this, but you can also use some kind of more precise method. I'm not going to do that right now. And kind of use location, rotation, and scale like this. And just to finish it off on frame 25, let's say I'm going to move it off screen. And I'll kind of capture that location, rotation, and scale. Notice I only use these many keyframes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 keyframes here, right? And I have 60 frames, but maybe I don't need all those. Maybe I can go down to 30 frames, right? I'll expand that more so you can see that there's more frames in there, right, that I'm looking at. Each frame has its own little line. And what I can do is I can actually play the animation. So let's see how this looks like. Woo, 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 right? Almost looks like something's happened, like the cube is jumping, right? And if I really want to, instead of playing it this way, I can play it backwards, right? Whoa, whoa, right? What's really happening is not happening in 2D, though. We're looking at it in 2D, right? But it's really happening is I'm seeing it, and it's actually happening in 3D, right? So my animation frames can happen both on the 2D and 3D plane, right? So I'm actually affecting the location of these things. So this is like it's frame-based animation, right? Because what's happening is our eye is actually only seeing the motion between one frame and the other. Ooh, that was really loud. The other thing to notice is in Blender, my default settings is 24 frames per second. That's how many frames are being shown to us. Our human persistence of vision beyond 24 frames, we can fool the eye. Like Disney Animation started producing movies around, if I'm not wrong, I think 12 frames per second. And then later on, they realized that when they added more frames, it became more realistic. Disney, the actual man, Disney, who produced this animation in the beginning, he realized that the more frames you add, the more realistic. They use also something akin to motion capture back in the day. That was called rotoscoping, right? Where you actually were able to, look at a human being, they filmed the human, and then they actually drew over him, right? To kind of create natural motion, natural animation, rotoscoping. But more or less what's happening is that our eyes can't detect things after about 24 frames. So most movies for many years were only around 24 frames per second, right? And that's why you can see Blender is here set at 24 frames. However, most video games run at 60 frames per second. What does this do for our animation, right? Well, it actually makes it faster, right? Because what's happening is now our animation, and this is attempting, you can see how it's not quite running. Here's my frames per second up here. Remember, I'm also broadcasting and I got Unity running in the background. It doesn't matter if I have an i7 and 16 gigs of RAM. It's just, it's my video card too, right? I've got a 2 gig video card and it's trying to process all this stuff all at once, my voice and everything else, nice and smooth. And, it's struggling, right? But anyways, the idea is that the higher the frame rate, right, the faster the animation will play for the number of keyframes that I've drawn, okay? I could also drag out the number of keyframes. So instead of making it this long, I can change my animation. There's something called an F-curve editor. So I can go in Blender. If I go to the animation editor here, you can see that I have my animation timeline down here. Right here it is. And I have another thing called a dope sheet. Here, let me show you this. So here's a dope sheet. And this is coming down from the folks at when they were actually true animators. There was something called a dope sheet. And the dope sheet itself, I can actually scrub through the dope sheet. I can do my little animations here, right here in the dope sheet. This is my scrubber, right? That's what it's called. I'm moving my little, it looks like a little line that moves back and forth, but I can scrub through the animations. That's what's happening, right? So I'm scrubbing through the changes in position really, really quickly. Well, the great thing is that in my scrubber, I can select all my stuff and I can scale my frames way out there, so it'll take a lot longer. Take a look how I'm doing that. I'm actually scaling them out. So you can see that the keyframes are going to be scaled out. So instead of taking 30 frames, I want them to take, I don't know, let's say 180 frames. And now, of course, they're not going to show up. Oops, let's go back. That's too many. Let's say 180 frames. So now that I've done this, 180 frames, I've got to change how much of my animation I'm going to show. So let's make it so it's like, I don't know, 200. There's my animation. And now it's not going to start exactly at the beginning, but you can see how when I play my animation, it's going to be much slower now, right? Much slower than before, right? Because I've expanded the keyframes. I've kind of pulled them apart. So it's going to take longer, even at 60 frames per second, it's going to take longer for us to play that animation. It also looks much smoother, right? The farther apart they are. So this is what animation looks like. I'm using just a 3D tool to do that, but it doesn't matter. Unity also supports this kind of stuff, this animation, right? This frame-based animation. And we can use a sprite sheet to flip between different poses, right? I have a little animation that I already put into our project, right? So if I go back to MailPilot, how does this relate? Because you can ask me, okay, Tom, thank you very much for all that, but who cares, right? How does that relate? Well, if I go into Sprites, this is on your project. And again, for what I'm looking at here is a project called COMP305 F2017-MailPilot demo. It's up on GitHub for those people who are joining me late. So here's GitHub. If I look at Centennial College, you can see that I've got this little demo right here. And this is the same demo that I put up on my GitHub pages, right? So you can see the the WebGL version of this, right? So here it is. And inside there, what I have is I have a few sprites for my plane. So instead of having one sprite for my plane, this one, I have 3 more. Let's go into the main scene here for a second. Here's my main scene. And this is what my plane looks like. I'm just going to zap in there closer to the plane so you can see what it looks like. So right now, if I look at my main scene, you can see that the plane has propellers, but they look like they're just flat, right? That's what they're like, right? However, if you look at my sprites, I have other poses for my plane, right? I have propellers that are flat. I have propellers that are on one side. It's hard to see. Let's see if I can bring that a little closer. No. And propellers that go on the other side. So I want the propellers to kind of move. Very, very simple animation. And there's only 3 frames. Right? So there's one that's propellers on the right side and the propellers on the left side. And I want to flip between these things. How do I do that? Well, I pick the frames that I want. So here's all the frames for my animation. And if I drag and drop these frames onto the screen, right, it produces instantly a new animation, right? I'm going to call this the plane animation. I've just dragged 3 sprites onto the screen. Okay, that's all I'm doing. Plane animation. And right now, it looks like it's going to go into sprites. I don't have another, in my assets folder, I don't have a folder for animation. I'm going to make one. I'm going to call this animations. Right? Make a folder in my project. And then my plane animation, I'm just going to drop in there. All right, so that's what's happened. So my plane, here's my plane. And notice it says plane 3. It's only one object. It comes in as one object, right? A couple things to note. My sprite render still has an order and layer. I've got to remember my ocean is 0. My island is 1. My plane is probably 2. So I'm going to put this at 2. So you can see that now there's the plane next to it. And oops, no, zoom out here so you can see. I'm going to leave the plane in place. And I want you to focus on what the plane is doing when I run the animation. Now, this is with doing nothing, just dragging and dropping into Unity, right? So if I press play, it's going to show me my animation. Here's my plane, and you can see
Yay.
You can see that in my scene, my plane is actually animating. That's what the new plane is doing. Okay. So it looks like the propellers are changing. Question for you is this, right? No, the game ended, right? But question for you: when we look at the plane, I'm just going to kind of stop this little thing so you can see it. Just curious, right? Is that too fast? The animation, it's happening quite fast. Remember, I'm running at, let's say, 50 frames or 60 frames per second, and the animation only has 3 frames. That means that animation, so it's going to go from frame 1 to frame 2 to frame 3. That took 3 frames, but I'm playing 60 frames, right? That means the animation is going to repeat itself 20 times in a second. That loop is happening 20 times because I only have 3 frames. Let's say assume that my frame rate for my game is 60 frames per second. So that means it's refreshing the screen or redrawing the screen 60 times every second, once every 16.6666 milliseconds, right? So if that's true, then what I want is maybe my frame rate, let's turn that down. Maybe my frame rate is, for my planes, I have a lot of frames, but that I can use, but I only have 3 little images, right? And I just dragged and dropped this. Notice that I did that, right, on my screen for my plane. But I have this plane, right? This is my main plane. I have something called plane 3. Remember that my player object, here's my player object, right? It's the one that has my capsule collider on it. It has my player controller script, all these things, right? But if I look at my plane object for a second, it has my plane 3 sprite. There is no plane 3 sprite, right? I have plane 1, 2, 3, but it's only showing my plane 3 sprite. And then it has my animator, something called an animator built into it. And then it has something called a controller that it's pointing to. Okay, where the heck is all this stuff? And all I do is drag these three sprites onto my screen, right, to create this. Well, if I look at my animations, I have in my animations folder, I'm just going to bring these closer so you can see them. I have a couple of objects inside my animations folder that I just created, right? One of them is called the plane animation. Okay, and that's one thing. The other thing is this plane 3 thing that looks like you have some kind of connections. Well, if I double click on this thing, you can see what it does. It takes me into a new window called the Animator Window. Okay, here's my Animator Window. And I have something called an entry point. What this actually is here, guys and girl, is a state machine. Okay, that's what this is. It's a state machine. So in code, it's going to change states. Right now, there's only one state for my plane, the propeller rotating, right? And this plane animation itself is a clip, right? So if I look at the plane animation, you can see that there's the motion that's happening is a plane animation. The speed is 1. Speed is 1. That means that it's 1 for 1. So if I have 3, I can increase the speed to 2 to make it faster, twice as fast. I can go to 0.5 to slow it down, and so on. You know, as an example, these are the things I have. I have this little arrow that goes from my entry point to my plane animation. And this is my plane animation right here. Now, unfortunately, we can't see the preview. Normally if I press here, you can see that the preview of what's happening. This is how fast it would play, the plane animation. So I have 2 parts. This is my plane animation clip, and this is my animator. And they're not named properly right now, just because they're automatically made, right? So if I click on here in my plane 3, I'm going to call this the plane animator, right? And this is my plane animation clip, right? That's what this is, and that's why it's really an action, if you will, right? And notice it says loop time. Also, if I click onto it, loop time means that my animation is going to loop. It's going to play again and again and again. If I uncheck this option, it would only play once. Okay, so sometimes you need to play an animation once. Think about an explosion as a good example. I've got an explosion. Right? I want to play the animation only once. I don't want to keep playing the animation over and over again, like a loop, right? Because if I played it like a loop, then it would keep exploding, right? It would keep showing an explosion happening over and over again, right? So here's loop time, right? And that's why it's clicked on. So I have a little animation that's playing. Okay, I also have, so this is the animator window. And this animator window, by the way, you can find by going to window, and you can go to the animator window, right? I also have something called the animation window. Here's my animation window. I'm just going to just put this on too. There's two things. This looks like very similar to the timeline, a dope sheet we just saw in Blender, right? Where I have a sprite. Here's my sprite, right? And right now, if I look at the plane animation, so if I double click on that, right, you can see that the sprite itself is on the plane animation. I've got 12 samples, right? That's what it looks like here. And here's my other. I'm just going to zoom out here. You can see that I have 3 frames. 1, 2, 3. This is neat. And this is called the dope sheet, right? This is the dope sheet right here. Right? Huh? Pretty dope, right? And what it does is it shows that this is 0, 0, this is 0, 1, this is 0, 2, right? And these are different frames that I'm playing. So if I scrub through this, just like I did before, if I want to scrub through this animation, right, then I should be able to move my scrubber, right, from one to the other, or I can move my animation around if I want to, right? That's what it allows me to do. I can also look at the curves, which we'll talk about. That's more of an advanced thing. See if I can kind of zoom out here to kind of look at that, right? That's probably about right. So this shows you if there's any kind of curves to the animation. It's pretty straight, right? And go back to the dope sheet. So that's really what it does. It kind of shows us the animation. And if I was to play, notice there's some controls up here where I can play, you know, as an example, I can move to the next, I can move to the first part. I can go to the next one, and I can go, you know, through each stage of the animation. I can also, if I want to add more frames, or I want to move a frame around, like for example, let's say I want to move this frame from frame 2, I want to move it to frame 3, then it's just a simple thing as dragging and dropping. So I can change the timing of my animation. So it'll be kind of weird if I did this, right? Because then one of the propellers would take a little bit longer to show up, right? But sometimes this is important, right? So let's move it back. So I can change the timing of my animation, because remember, these are just each of the frames, right? I only have 3 frames here for my plane. So this is the animation window. So there's the animator, which tells us the states. Right now, there's only one state. It's the plane animation state, right? In fact, I like to call this the idle state. So when the plane is idle, the propeller is spinning, right? The plane isn't moving around or anything like that. Okay, let's try this out. So let's say we can rename this thing just to make it change. We'll say this is the idle state, right? And if I want to, I can get rid of this animator right altogether. So there's my plane animation. I can get rid of it. So let's just go delete. So I have no animation right now. And I can take this idle state and drag and drop it into my animator window, right? It's the same thing. It's just called idle. You can also rename these things as well. Here's the animation speed and so on, right? And again, if I want to play the clip, typically it would show up. No, this one doesn't. Okay. My idle animation. All right, let's go back to the plane itself, though. So the plane number 3, I have something called the sprite is plane 3. That's what it is. And this also points to which of the sprites is going to show up first, right? That's what this is, right? So right now it's plane 3. I don't have to point to that. I can point to plane 1 or plane 2, right? And if I don't know what those are, right, because we don't know what those are right now, let's take a look at those sprites again. And we'll look at them a little closer. So I can bring up the detail here, right? I usually don't, because I don't care about bringing up the detail, but you can see that in my assets, I can try and see which ones they are. If I can't see it, right? If I can't see it, I can double click my asset, right? And what it'll do is it'll bring up my plane sprite in my default editor. My default editor for mine is Fireworks. You can also change your default editor. And it'll allow you to edit the asset. You can see that this one here has my propeller on the left. Here's my propeller on the left. So maybe, I don't know, we'll see if that's the one I want to use, right? If I go back to Unity and that's plane 1. If I double click plane 2, and if I kind of go in here, it looks like that's my propeller on the right. So one is propeller on the left, one is propeller on the right. See? So plane 3 then is propellers on both sides. Looks like there's nothing, there's no propellers, right? So it kind of flips. So this is the neutral state, and this is the plane that I've been using the whole time before today, right? This is like my default plane animation with no propellers moving, right? So I think this is a great animation to start with, plane 3, right? Okay, so different animations. I'm not going to edit any of that, but you can see that I can do that by double clicking here in Unity, right? So plane 3 is the animation I'm playing. Okay, I'm going to go back, just move this all the way back here and zoom back out. So that's what it's called, right? So I want to use this. This is the one that I want to use, plane 3, this little animation. I don't want to use my player anymore, right? I want to use my plane for my player. Okay, so this is what I want to do. And you know, now that I've created my animation, I don't have to use my plane, my plane 3 here, okay? Notice what I have. I have a sprite renderer, right? Order in layer 2. And I have an animator that's pointing to my plane animator, right? That's all I have, right? So theoretically, if I delete my plane 3 object and I go back to my player, I have my plane, but instead of using my plane, I want to move from my plane to my plane 3. I can point to. So that's my sprite that I'm rendering. Sprite renderer basically points to the object that I'm going to draw, okay? So I can kind of minimize that. And now I want to add a new component, right? Want a new component. And if you don't see it in here, right? Now here's rendering. And you can see that if I want to kind of add an animator. So if I just type in animator, right? Here's my animator. So I add the animator in, right? Here it is. And I want to move this up kind of closer to my sprite renderer, just because. So it looks very similar. So I'm going to move it up. Doesn't make any difference for me. I just want to move it up so it's just above my script. So that way it's in order, right? There it is. Now I know I have my animations here, right? Inside my animations folder. My idle animation is part of my plane animator already. I did that. So if I drag and drop my plane animator into my controller, then I'm good to go, right? That's all it took. I just added an animator. I already had the plane animator because I dragged and dropped my plane and created it for me. Once I have this structure in place, right, then I can just drag and drop and everything is good. Now it says clip count 1. It says curves position 0, and it gives me some different options, whatever. I really don't care about this. Update mode is normal. There's also other ones like animate physics in unscaled time, all kinds of stuff like that we're not going to use. But I want to, there's also something else called apply root motion. That's if I want to make something look like it's walking, okay? Okay, cool. So that's pretty cool, man. Like I've got some really good stuff happening, right? Let's see if it actually works now with my plane. So I'm going to run my game, right? And yeah, my plane now has some animation built into it, right? Take a look at that. I didn't take anything to do, right? Right?
Yay.
Now it's pretty slow, right? It looks like I can see my my stuff, you know, running around, but it's pretty good. Okay, well, hey, we just added animation, a little animation clip from my propeller. I want to save this thing and put it up on GitHub, right? I also want to save this thing and try my build. So let's build it. So first I'll save my scene, and then I'll save my project, right? I want to go to build and run. Again, remember that this is going to build it for the web. It's also going to create a builds folder, right? I have a builds folder that I'm going to replace, right? I have my builds folder that I'm going to replace. And I want to put this up on GitHub pages again, because I remember I'm using my github.io page to showcase this game, right? Let's see how this works. And just for our little test, I'll just close Blender off so it gives us a little bit of a little bit more memory power, right? So it doesn't kill our machine. It's taking a little bit of time. So what have we learned? Let's go back. So frame-based animation, I'm flipping between one sprite and another at a certain time. Right now, I'm not really trying to vary the time frame at all. I'm just flipping through them, right? And I'm showing you this because some of your games, for example, the tank game, if you want to do some kind of groovy animation, the animation can be very simple. For example, some kind of glowy effect, right? Let's say your tank, if you're making a tank game or some other kind of game, you want to make it so that it seems that your objects are glowing, right? Well, actually, what you're doing is you can use animation, frame-based animation, to swap between different states of your sprite. So, for example, maybe there isn't an actual movement, just a glow that's happening in your sprite, right? And you can do that with just by flipping sprites, right? So we've learned about flipping frames and how that gives us the effect. Our human persistence of vision, our ability for us to see the changes, is so slow that it fools us, right? That's why movies work. If you go to a movie theater, what's actually happening is you have different frames of the movie, and it's passing by your vision so quickly that you can't tell. It looks like it's like you're part of the movie. The movies are playing faster and faster. Video games work the same way. At one point, having 30 frames per second on a video game was really, really cool. Now it's not good enough. It was 60. It was 60%. It was 60 was good at one point. Now that's not good enough, right? We're moving towards more, and more. And the reason why we want higher and as high as we can is because, especially as we use VR, we want, as we move into the age of VR, the higher the frame rate, even higher than 60 and 90, we'll have less jitter because it's so close to us that it's going to be more realistic and going to cause us less VR sickness than some of the older, slower games. Okay, so here's my mail pilot. Yay. And you can see that my propellers are working. So see, my animation's working now in my game. This is just my little test. Don't notice it's on localhost. Localhost means I'm just running it local as in part of the local server. This is great. So I can put this up online. That's my next step, which means I need to leave Unity. I'm showing you this because some people don't know still how to use GitHub, right? So I'm saving my project, and then I'm quitting Unity, right? Remember, I got to quit Unity in order for me to put it up to GitHub, right? So we can capture everything, at least for now. I'm going to bring up my terminal window, and I'm going to go into where I have my folders for Unity. My folder structure is being quite cluttered lately. Here's my Unity projects. You can see that this project here is the one that I'm looking at. So I'm going to say CD space. I'm going to pull this into my terminal window. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to say git add dot. I'm adding everything to the local Git repository. That's the first command. And then I'm going to say git commit -m, and I'll say added plain animation. That's what really I did. Okay, that's all that stuff. And then I'll say git push origin to the master branch. And this should push everything up to GitHub nicely. Okay, now this includes my build, right? Now, remember what I did when I created my github.io project, right? And I'm talking about my GitHub pages. I have a special page. My own page is my last name.github.io, right? That's what it is. And I have my older version of the game on there. And I have another folder for this. I'm just going to close this off for a second. Here it is. This is my last name.github.io. And you can see that I have a build, index.html, and some template data, all this stuff. Okay. This isn't going to change, right? This stuff here is not going to change. I'm not going to change any of this. But my build folder has got a new Unity loader with my new stuff inside of it, right? So this stuff I do want to change. And if I go back to my folders directory, my folders folder, and I go back to my Unity projects, and I go into my COMP305 project, I see that I have a build, and inside there I have a WebGL build with a build index.html folder right here and template data, right? So this stuff, it looks like it's the same. To be safe, I should grab all these three things, right? All these three things, and replace what I've got over here, right? So I copy these, right? And I pull them into here. It's going to ask me, do I want to replace? I'm going to say replace everything, right? It's replaced everything. You can see that all these things were replaced. So that my local repository for Siliopoulos, that's my last name, .github.io, right, is replaced. I'm going to go back out to the desktop for a second. And I want to go now into this folder, cd space. Drag and drop this one in there. And I want to clear the screen. And then if I do a git add dot, I got two things I'm maintaining, right? Git commit -m, and I'll say added plain animations. I'm doing it twice, and I'll tell you why in a second. And then I'll say git push origin master. This will push things right up to my GitHub page. So there's two parts, right? Do I have to do it this way? No, I'm just separating it for you to tell you that I have two. I'm running two repositories now, right? One that's my final build, right? That's in this repository, and one that's I'm actually working on for my Unity project that I put up on GitHub on Centennial College, right? So this build here is the one that I'm actually pushing, so you guys can see it live. Okay, this one here. So let's see if that worked. So I'm going to go back to Up Online, and I'm going to look at my. So the way you do it is you go to github.com/ that particular page. If I actually look at, sorry, I don't do that. I'll say Siliopoulos.github.io. That's what it would be like this. Type that in, press enter, right? And then it's going to bring up my mail pilot game. There it is. But notice it changed to my custom domain because I'm pointing my custom domain to my GitHub page, right? And I have a special file called the CNAME file that has the custom domain. I've also gone up to Google GoDaddy and pointed my Siliopoulos.com domain to my GitHub page. And you can do that if there's instructions online on how to do that. And then if I start, I should see my propellers working, right? There we go. And you guys should too. So if you guys go up online now and go to my website, so it's Siliopoulos.com, and play the game, you should see the propellers working, right? Remember that for next week, right, regardless if I'm here or not, I want to see your game up. Your first playable is due next week on Saturday, right? That means you should have, for next week, motion, right, collisions, your basic mechanic. I'm looking at those things, like how your game moves. What does your game look like? What is your game about? All those things should be up and running next week for yourself, right? So if you don't have that by now, that's pretty bad. That's like you guys are way behind, right? For guys who are making the shooter games, right? That means I think you guys are making shooter games, right? You guys should have all that ready to go pretty much, because I'm giving you a template to make a shooter game right here, right? I mean, at least the very minimum, like this kind of stuff is what you would be using, right? So here's my my little game. I put it up online, and this would be something like my first playable, because I have collisions. I have a bit of a user interface. Sounds are not required for your first playable, right? I don't care about sounds right now. I've added them in because they're easy, and I showed you how to do that last week, right? But your first playable requires at least your base mechanic, to be working, and it should be up on github.io or some other place you want to host it. You don't have to host it there. You can host it wherever you like, as long as I can look at the your game on the web, okay, as a showcase. All right, so this is Mail Pilot, and the first part we talked about was animations. Very, very simple animations. Before we stop this recording, I want to go back into Unity. Again, for those people who came in late, just to advise you again that Unity has updated to 2017.2. please don't update that now. Please update that when you get home. It takes about an hour or so to do because there's a lot of little pieces to it. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my demo, and I want to take a look at the Unity, the scene that I've just developed, right? So I have individual sprites for my game, right now. I have individual sprites. Okay, so I have in my sprites, I have 3 planes, like all these assets: a cloud sprite, an island sprite, an ocean sprite, all these other things here. What I'd like to have is one sprite sheet that I look at, and again, to really make my game even tighter, smaller, right? Especially when I have thousands of sprites. Like right now, I only have a few, right? But imagine if I have a big animation for my game, right? Like, for example, I have a walk cycle for one of my characters, and it takes, I don't know, 10 frames. And then I have another walk cycle or some kind of flight cycle, a flying animation for some kind of flying enemy, right? That takes 10 frames. It means 10 of these images, right? And then I have another animation for my boss monster that takes 20 frames, right? And you can see how it goes. It's going to fill up the screen with a bunch of assets, right? And that's really inefficient to look at, right? And it's also lots and lots of assets to kind of load up one at a time, right? So we use Sprite Sheets as a way of minimizing, our file access. That's what we do, because we don't need individual sprites like this. By the way, we use Sprite Sheets on the web. We use Sprite Sheets with OpenGL, right? We use Sprite Sheets with all kinds of stuff. All right, so how do we make a Sprite Sheet? Well, I'm going to use something called Texture Packer, like I mentioned, right? So I'm going to kind of search for it for me. So here's my Texture Packer, right? Now I pay for mine. It's about $55. It updates quite regularly, and sometimes what happens with Texture Packer, you can get a trial version for those people who can't afford. If you're a student, if you're a struggling student, you have no money, as an example. But notice that it allows my framework. It allows me to point to different frameworks. Right now, I'm looking at Easel.js or Create.js because it also works with that. So people who are doing my web game course, I'm going to talk about Texture Packer today there. But you can see that a new version of is ready to install. Would you like to install it and relaunch Texture Packer now? Sure, I'll do that while we're talking. So what Texture Packer does, that was nice and easy. It allows me to pick different formats, right? Notice all the things it supports, right? So I can create a sprite sheet only. I can create one for Unity. I can do for different kinds of formats. 2D toolkit. Just going to go down here. It's just for CSS if you want to use it for the web. Gitterus, which is an older way of creating games with Python. Or sorry, it's not Python. It's is it Go? I can't remember. You can see that there's a lot of other ones that it supports. Molecule and Panda and Phaser. That's a web framework. Pixie.js, as an example. Shiva 3D. Spine, for another framework that actually does bones. SpriteKit for both Objective-C and Swift on iOS, right? And a bunch of others. Here's Unreal Engine for Paper 2D, right? And so on. It does support quite a few different platforms. We don't care about any of those other than Unity. So I'm going to click on Unity, right? And it says update project settings to recommended values. I'm going to click convert. There's Unity. And you can see that I have my Unity project has two parts. One is a data file, and the other one is a texture file. So there's two things that it'll include. Okay. So how do I make use of this thing? Well, I'm going to go into my projects. So I'm going to go back into here's my project, right? And in my assets, I have sprites, right down here, sprites. This is actually looking at the sprites on my operating system. And I'm going to pull the sprites in that I want to put into my sprite sheet. Okay, so I'm going to pull my cloud, right? And then I'm going to pull in my islands. And I'm going to pull in my plane 1, 2, 3, plane 1, plane 2, and plane 3. Okay. Notice what it does. It kind of makes kind of a canvas, if you will, right, or an atlas of different sprites all in one PNG file. So that's the first step. The other thing is that there's some options here on the bottom, right? And I'm going to put this on the side. So for people who are looking at this, just looking at the video because you don't have access to Texture Packer, that's okay, right? There's other ways of packing textures. Here's your pixel format, right? RGBA 8888. You can also pick other ones, right? We're not going to talk about that right now. There's also max rex, right? And basic. There's different kinds of algorithms you can use to compress, right? Also the maximum size, 2048 by 2048. That's the size of your texture in pixels, right? That's what you're creating here. And notice that the trim mode is polygon outline, right? You can also choose none if you don't want to have a trim mode, or you can flush position. The one that I want to choose is this one, which is advanced settings. Advanced settings. And what it allows me to do is modify some of this stuff, right? So here's the sprite itself, how it traces around the sprite. And if I look at this, you can see that each of the sprites, as I'm clicking on them, right, it moves from one sprite to the other. And it has this little outline that goes around the sprite. Okay. Itself, right? Here's my texture file if I want to look at that. Here's my texture file format, right? These are thing. And look at this. My size constraints, it says, is power of 2. What does this mean, power of 2? It means that I want to normally keep it in terms of a specific size. So notice that my sprite sheet size right now is 256 by 512. That's a power of 2, right? Each part, width and height, is a power of 2, right? 256 is a power of 2. 512 is a power of 2, right? And we usually want to keep it in terms of one of those things because it's easier for us. It's better from a loading perspective to load something that's in terms of powers of 2, okay? So example, 1024 by 1024 or 256 by 256, that's pretty low res. 512 by 512, those kind of things as well. So that's one of the things. I can choose also other ones, like for example, word aligned. So I really make it nice and tight. And notice now that it's not power of 2, it's 264 by 248, some other weird number. It also cuts down on my size though. It's cutting down to 255K, right? As opposed to if I go back to power of 2, this is 512K, so half a meg, just to load this thing. Okay. And there's another option, which is any size, which allows me to ramp this thing if I want to. This is 264 by 248 again, and it kind of wraps around the sprites as much as I want them to. I'm going to go back to, now it says maximum size. Here's maximum size, and this is the height, 2048, right, as an example. You could change these options as well. So you can say, well, my maximum size is only going to be 512. I'm going to limit myself to 512, right? My height, I don't want my height to be bigger than a certain value. You can do that. So you can change your sprite sheet to look a certain way. Okay. I'm going to go back to power of 2. Again, this is the easiest way for graphics programs, even the ones you make yourself with OpenGL, to kind of interpret and look at data. You want it to be power of 2, typically. Okay. All right. That's good. I can also look at an animation preview. If I pick 3 sprites in a row, so if I say, well, I want to look at these 3 sprites, and if I click on animation preview, it'll show you the animation playing, right? I can increase it to whatever I want, right, as an example. So there's my speed. I can go to, 2 times speed. Okay. That didn't seem to work. But anyways, you can see, you can kind of preview. Let's try that again. You can preview the animation right away. So so instead of me having this thing work, let's see if I can make that work. Now there it is. You can see that that's how it looks like. You can see the plane moving around, which is cool. So you can preview the animation before you put it up on what you're doing. It's kind of cool. That's why, to me, Texture Packer is a really cool tool. Right? So this is cool. Now I want to save this thing, and there's a couple ways to do that. So this is I need a data file because I'm using Unity, right? So I'm going to choose where to put it. Notice it's putting it inside my sprites data. I'm just going to call this, mail pilot atlas, because that's what it is, a texture atlas, right? And it's going to be of type TP sheet, texture packer sheet, right? That's what it's going to be. And I'm going to click save, right? And if I publish the sprite sheet, if I click publish, right, you can see that it's going to publish the sprite sheet 256 by 512 in a specific place, right? So it's going to go to folders, MP assets. That's the wrong place to go. That's the wrong place to go. I got to make sure it goes in the right places. Then that's bad. Here's my output files. Make sure that output file goes in the right place. So it's going to go into images. And I don't want it to go here. I want it to go back into my desktop. Let's try that again. I'm going to go back into my folders. And inside my Unity projects, I want to make sure that it goes into the right one, which is Mail Pilot. You can see all these ones. Mail Pilot over here inside my assets, inside my scripts. My sprites. There it is. Sprites. I want it to go here, and I don't want it to be images. I want it to be called Mail Pilot Atlas, right? And it's going to be in PNG format, right? So save that. Okay, let's try that again. So I'm going to publish, right? Oh, and give me some options too. It says, hey, data and texture file must be located inside your Unity project's asset folder, right? The TP sheet file must be located in the same folder in the texture as the texture. Okay, so it says MP asset. It's going to the wrong place, right? So let me put that in the right place too. I don't know why it went there. Maybe that's the default place. But let's just put that back. So I'm going to go back to, again, my desktop. And I'm going to go back into my folders, Unity projects, COMP305 Mail Pilot 2017, inside my assets folder, inside my sprites folder, right? And that's what this is going to be, so save. So now that should fix my problem. And if I click publish sprite sheet, it should produce it in the right place. And that's why I saw this and I was like, oh no, this is wrong. It went to the wrong place. Cool. Okay, so what did this do? Well, if I go back to my Unity, I have additional information here inside my folders. Remember, because the way Unity does it is if you drag and drop or you change something in the operating system, it actually tries to import it and make it serializes it so it can be used across Unity. But I'm not done yet. Unity needs a plugin for you to make Texture Packer work. So I'm going to go back into my asset store. I'm using Unity to do this now. So I want to go into my asset store. So I'm going to see asset store, right? And I want to search for Texture Packer. In a second, hopefully this will come up instead of give me all this funky stuff here. There we go. Yay, asset store. So I'm inside Unity in the asset store, and I'm going to type in Texture Packer. So I'm going to say Texture Packer, right? Sometimes it needs two lines. Let me take a look. Hey, there it is. Texture Packer. And it's called Texture Packer Importer, right? There's two, actually. There's Texture Packer Importer, and there's something called Texture Packer Sprite Tools. Notice that this is made by OrcTech, right? And this is made by codeandweb.com, right? This is the one you want, not this one. This is 30 bucks, and this is free. So Texture Packer Importer, here it is. What it does is it allows us to import sprites properly, right? So I'm going to click import. What it does is it's going to add some stuff, right, into our project. Now notice it also is going to add some examples, okay, which is really cool. I want to look at some of these examples with you, so that's why I'm bringing them in. But however, I could decide not to by clicking this button. Anytime I import a package into Unity, I have a choice to insert or not any of the pieces of the package. I'm going to bring this in. So notice the editor is going to change, right? My editor When it says editor here, it means like literally my editor will change. The way my Unity interface will look will be modified. And you can make changes to the Unity interface this way. I'm going to click import because I want to import everything. And it's going to import things in the root of my folder. Okay, in the root of my folder. Okay, so there's my code and web. It says code and web. I'm just going to kill this for a second so we don't have to see that anymore. I'm going to drag this out a little bit more so we can see my my assets. So I have this thing called code and web, and underneath that I have something called editor, right, and example. What does README say though? README is very important. It says the texture packer importer script located in assets code and web editor extends your Unity editor to read Sprite Atlas data created with texture packer. It automatically detects changed or newly added sprites written by texture packer, right? So what you need to do is, it says in your texture packer project, you have to select the data format, Unity, and do this kind of stuff, right? Typically what you have to do is see this editor folder, you need to drag it out into the main assets folder, right? When you do that, the editor itself will change, right? And this is important to do. It has to be in your assets folder like this. I've got my example over here, okay? Now what I want to do is I want to go back into Sprites, and in my Atlas, these two files here, right? I want to highlight them. And what I want to do is I want to re-import. I want to click re-import because I brought them in without texture packer being part of my texture packer importer. If I click on my Atlas now, if I've done everything correctly, I should be able to see, and I don't, I should be able to see it being a texture Atlas. No, it's not just this, but it looks like it's multiple, right? It's not single anymore. My sprite mode is multiple, my packing tag, and so on. I can definitely click Sprite Editor, and what this will do is allow me to go into there and manually select each of the sprites themselves, and they're also named, and they also have a position and so on, right? Okay. But I was hoping that my editor, I may have to close down Unity and relaunch. Let's try that again. So quit. And I'll relaunch Unity because I've modified Unity, right, with that new stuff. When it launches, we should see some changes. Let's take a look. So just want to make sure that the texture packer stuff works. And if not, over the break, which I'm going to take in a second, I'm going to go and take a look at how to do that and modify it. I believe that's all you needed to do, but I should see something else going on here, not what I'm looking at right now, I think. And this is my MP Atlas, and if I click open, that's going to open up my Atlas, but that is not what it should look like at all. Right. So yeah, I was hoping to see something different in my editor. Here's my editor settings for my my Atlas, and it said basically this is what it does. It says assets code name codeandweb.com example Sprite Sheets, and then it kind of points to these things. And I'm wondering if it needs to do anything else. So let's take a short break, and when I come back, what I'm going to do is make sure that this thing is working the way it's supposed to work. And I'm sure there's some kind of instructions to make Unity work for it because it's changed over the years. A couple times that I've used it, it's just a straight import, and I have to put the editor folder on the root of my project, and it changed the editor. Now I don't see. This is where I know it's not working because I don't see any changes to my editor whatsoever, right? Usually I can see an extra option for sprites, right? Like I have rendering and tile maps and so on, but there's something missing because usually I'll see something else. Oh, Sprite Packer, but not Texture Packer. That's the regular Sprite Packer that comes with Unity, right? So let me take a look at that in the break. But anyways, the great thing is it allows me to, even now, it still did pretty good stuff, because what it did was it brought in my my MailPilot Atlas. Here it is right now, right? And each one of these sprites, I can use these sprites here instead of these sprites here from my rendering. Let me show you what I mean. So if I go to my player sprite renderer right now looks at plane 3, this one. But I can simply make it look at this one by dragging and dropping this one into here like this. So now it looks like my texture atlas, right? As opposed to these extra sprites, right? That's the first thing. Now, the same thing has to happen with my animation. I have to modify my animation so it looks at these sprites as opposed to these sprites. So there's some work to be done, but I wanted to show you how to do this so that way you understand how to use a sprite sheet, a simple sprite sheet, as opposed to you know, individual sprites. Okay, for now, let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll do more with animation, right? And I want to also talk about some additional things in terms of getting the animations working, more complex animations. And one of the things that they have in codeandweb.com that they give you is some examples. So here's some sprite examples, right? They have a sprite sheet, and they have some normals, some really cool things they got here. Let me see what they got here. They got this little guy, and you can see that there's some different frames of his sheet, and he actually moves around. This is pretty cool. I wonder if they have, maybe they don't have a scene, but we can probably make another scene with a walk cycle, which is pretty cool. So I want to show you how to do that with the stuff that comes right from codeandweb.com, right from Texture Packer, for free. Any questions before we stop the video? All right, let's take a 10-minute break or 15 minutes to get coffee, maybe go to McDonald's and all that stuff. People like going there on Saturday mornings. And then when we come back, I'll have Texture Packer working.